Welcome back to these lectures on the first half of Western civilization. Today's lecture is Charlemagne, the Rise of Christendom. Let's talk about context and significances first. I've got four contexts here for you. First is medieval Europe. This is that time period when we're speaking chronologically between the ancient or the classical world of Greece and Rome and then the Renaissance of the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. Another context, remember that the Western Roman Empire has dissolved. There's no overarching political authority over what had been the western part of the empire. Remember that the eastern part of the empire, Byzantium, is still in existence and will be to the middle of the 15th century. Another context is a religious one. Islam is encroaching upon Christianity, both in the Balkans and in Spain and later in France. And Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, won a famous victory against the Muslims in southern France in 1733. Charlemagne himself will do battle with the Muslims. So you have this larger context of Christianity versus Islam. And then finally, another context, the Romans would probably have viewed Charlemagne as simply another barbarian. Charlemagne himself thinks of himself as a latter-day Roman emperor. He's sort of carrying the mantle of classical Rome. Some significances. Charlemagne's kingdom represents probably the greatest unity in Europe between the fall of Rome and the rise of Napoleon. He is a Christian emperor in the West 500 years after the Emperor Constantine. Another significance, there's a great deal of dependency between the Pope Leo III, and Charlemagne. They do well by each other. The Pope gets protection, of course, from Charlemagne's armies, and then Charlemagne himself gets legitimacy from the Pope. Another significance, Charlemagne's empire combines both a Roman, a Germanic, and a Christian cultures and past and brings it together. And it asserts a separate Christian identity from Byzantium in the east, based at Constantinople. Another significance, and maybe the greatest significance of all, although it seems small, is the reproduction of books in the time of Charlemagne. Scribes copying ancient texts, making them available for both the bureaucracy, the clergy, and in time for the common people. These books, of course, will form the basis of later libraries throughout Europe. And of course, the scribes who did the actual copying of these texts, their print, their letters will form the model for the printed type that will emerge in the middle of the 15th century. Just a few words here about Charlemagne's career. He was crowned emperor by the Pope, by Leo III, in Rome in 800 of the Common Era. He was the king of the Franks and emperor from 800 to 814. He's both an historical and something of a legendary figure. His reign is often portrayed as sort of a golden age, a model for later rulers. And of course, he is depicted as the sort of latter-day ruler of the West in opposition to the Byzantine Empire in the East. Of course, Charlemagne's capital was at Aachen, which is in northern Europe, far from the classical cities of ancient Rome. Charlemagne himself was depicted as a large man. He had many wives, apparently had many illegitimate children. He was a learned figure. He spoke Latin. He also had a dark side, or a vicious side. In warfare, he could be brutal, There are legends of him beheading thousands of Saxons in a war in northwest Europe. Charlemagne has immense patronage. That is, he can award jobs and award royal benevolence to many people. He could attract and keep talented people in his court. He read Augustine's City of God. That's not an easy job for anyone. He's given credit for being better organized than his enemies, one of the reasons he tends to prevail in battle. He's given credit for institutional reform. He created something of a consensus in his rule of an emerging Christian empire. And speaking of which, let's talk for a minute about Charlemagne and Christianity. Again, like I said, Charlemagne supports the Pope, Leo III, and the Pope supports Charlemagne. This is a key alliance between these two. Charlemagne thinks of himself as a sort of warrior king for Christ. Charlemagne was concerned that church doctrine be properly taught, and he expects the church's backing in return for his support of the church. In 1165, Charlemagne is even canonized by the church. In the late 10th century, he could be seen as the founder of what would be later called the Holy Roman Empire, which will survive all the way up until Napoleon's time. Charlemagne, I believe, sees the Franks, the Frankish people, of whom he rules, as sort of the New Jerusalem, sort of a new chosen people. Again, the kingdom is steeped in the ideas of Christianity. Some have suggested that he viewed the Carolingian Empire, the Charlemagne's empire, as a new city of God here on earth. And I want to emphasize this notion of Christendom. I mentioned in the title of the lecture that the rise of Christendom. This is an important idea as the European peoples from the Mediterranean basin all the way to the North Sea begin to identify themselves as being a part of a larger Christian empire, Christendom, as we call it. This is a key identity, placing them in opposition to Muslims and other peoples. I want to say a few words about the Carolingian Renaissance here, and this again goes back to the manufacture of books, the scribes copying the ancient texts. This idea of a new Christian empire is really going to haunt Europe for some time, up until the French Revolution. Charlemagne used imagery from the classical Roman and Greek times. His palace at Aachen was modeled on Justinian's imperial church. His legal code copied from the Roman codes. In the arts and in all facets of life, Charlemagne reflected both Christian ideas and the classical ideas of Rome. The Carolingians themselves had an idea that they were experiencing a Renaissance during their own time. Charlemagne, of course, put a great deal of emphasis on education for the clergy and for his bureaucracy. The scribes who produced the manuscripts increases dramatically under Charlemagne's rule. The idea here is to retrieve these ancient texts, to preserve them, and then to copy them. A skilled scribe, I read, could copy 6 pages a day. Imagine the work that would go into copying the Bible when a skilled scribe can do 7 pages a day. These scribes write on parchment. They don't have paper yet. Parchment is sheepskin. Of course, the Bible lies at the heart of many of these efforts. These scribes working diligently to reproduce the Scripture. There's an attempt here to essentially disseminate the Bible to a wider audience. So the foundations of cultural life here in the Carolingian Empire are built in part on Catholicism. Education, again, the emphasis, there are 7 liberal arts which are widely taught. Grammar, obviously, logic, rhetoric. We don't think about rhetoric in our present-day curriculum. It's the ability to move people by the spoken word. Some pastors possess this gift, and a few politicians. Astronomy, one of the liberal arts. Of course, astronomy is perhaps the oldest of the sciences because people can simply gaze into the heavens and watch these celestial bodies move. Arithmetic, another one of the liberal arts, and geometry. Geo, earth, the suffix meaning measure. So geometry is measuring the earth. Charlemagne emphasized that every monastery should have a school, and that Charlemagne made possible for experts to be employed in his reign. I'm going to stop here with this first part on Charlemagne. In our next lecture, we'll talk about external threats to Charlemagne's empire, and we'll draw some big conclusions for the Carolingian period. Thank you.